So we're having this conversation, asking this question: what's it like around the church, around here, around specifically Church 180? And we're using words like that are found in the scriptures. St. Paul, he wrote to a group of people and he said, look, when God lives in you, these are the kinds of things that you'll see. You'll see love, joy, and peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. These are the kinds of things that you'll see in you. And so our assumption is that if our church is being led by people who have God living in us, and there are people sitting out here who have God living in you, then we should expect to see these kinds of characteristics in our church. Now, unfortunately, we've probably all had experiences where we've gone to a church and we didn't see these kinds of things. We didn't see love, and we didn't see joy. We didn't see peace and patience. Instead, it was like one of those things where, like, I can hardly wait to get out of here, right? My prayer is that our church won't be like that. Because what I believe is that if our church is filled with these kind of characteristics, and God begins to change my heart and your heart, and we begin to exude these kind of characteristics, our homes will begin to look different. I mean, wouldn't it be cool if your home had these kind of characteristics in it? Like love, joy, peace, patience. Even on a Sunday morning when you're trying to get ready for church, that'd be a good idea, right? We always joke like, sometimes getting ready to go to church, you're like, oh, come on, guys, we got to get in the car. And everybody's yelling and screaming, and you're fighting and all this stuff. And then you walk into church, you're like, hey, what's going on? Right? We all do it, right? But trying to create an environment like this, okay, in our church, but also in our homes, and quite frankly, even in our workplaces. So let me just show you a picture. This is Jake. And I have Jake's permission to tell the story. By the way, Jake is younger than me. Can you believe that? That guy looks old, doesn't he? He looks old, all right? I'm just kidding. But he's younger than me. He tells me that all the time. Anyways, so here's why I like Jake. I like Jake for a lot of reasons, but Jake told me this the other day. When he first started coming here, he like fairly kind of new to the whole church thing, and he was telling me the other day, he said, I've started praying. Now, that's kind of cool. He said, I used to, when I would be on my way to work in the mornings, I would talk to myself. Now, there's help for you, Jake, all right? But he would talk to himself on the way to work. He said, but recently I've actually begun talking to God. That's a great thing. And then Jake sent a prayer request last week, and he said, I want to start inviting my friends to be a part of this. I want to start inviting my friends to come, because what's happening around here is a good thing. Like what's happening around here, like we're beginning to see love and joy and peace and patience and God is beginning to do these kinds of things in our hearts so the story of our lives, our attitudes, our character, all of these things are beginning to change. And so when I hear Jake's story, I'm like, yay, God, that's so cool. So I'm praying with Jake, and I hope you pray with Jake and pray for Jake, and pray for me. That would be a good thing as well. So let me just ask you a question. Have you ever been assigned something that you looked at and felt like this is impossible? There's no way I can get this done. Like you looked at the project and thought, I don't know how I can get it done. I don't have the resources. I don't have the time. I don't have the right people. Have you ever been in that situation? Yeah, and so like sometimes as a parent, right, you look at maybe a kid or two kids or whatever, and you think like, how in the world am I going to effectively parent this child? I don't even know how to do this. Right? It almost feels impossible. Or maybe you're leading a team. You're working with a team. I remember when I was doing some graduate studies, we had to do these team projects, and it could be so frustrating because there's always someone on the team who sits back and lets everyone else do the work, and then they get the grade. Don't you hate that? Like, are you that person? Because we don't like you, right? I mean, oh, come on, right? But anyways, no, seriously, like sometimes like you evaluate a team, you're like, I don't even know, like this feels like it's impossible to get done. It's just a big deal. And so, I'm reading through the Bible and I'm thinking through like, what is it supposed to be like around the church, around here? And so I read this letter that St. Paul wrote to a young man named Titus. And as I'm reading through, I'm like, oh my gosh, I just want to read this together, okay? So this is what St. Paul says to Titus. He said, I left you on the island of Crete so that you could complete our work there, all right? We started something, and Titus, I want you to finish it. and I want you to appoint elders in each town as I instructed you. So this is your job. We started doing something. I want you to appoint elders. Now, if you don't know what an elder is, when the Bible talks about elders, it doesn't necessarily mean age. It is actually a role that's played by someone in the church. Like an elder is a spiritual leader, a pastor. And so Paul says to Titus, he's like, look, we started some churches there on the island of Crete, and I want you to finish that job and appoint some elders. All right? And then, look at this. This is what he does. He said, I'm going to tell you what an elder looks like. An elder must live a blameless life. He must be faithful to his wife, and his children must be believers who don't have a reputation for being wild or rebellious. An elder is a manager of God's household, so he must live a blameless life. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered. He must not be a heavy drinker, violent or dishonest with money. Rather, he must enjoy having guests in his home. He must love what is good. He must live wisely and be just. He must live a devout and disciplined life. He must have a strong belief system a strong belief in the trustworthy message he was taught. Then he'll be able to encourage others with wholesome teachings and show those who oppose where they're wrong. Now, so Paul said, look, I want you to finish the work that we started. I want you to go out and find people who are qualified. We just read the qualifications to serve in positions of spiritual leadership in the church. And they need to know what they're talking about because they're going to need to confront some issues that are going on there, right? They're going to have to encourage others with the teachings that they are familiar with, and they're going to have to oppose those who are wrong. And then he said, you're going to need to do this. You're going to need to have this kinds of information and be able to have this character because there are some teachers on this island of Crete. He said, there are many who are rebellious people who engage in useless talk and deceive others. This is especially true of those who insist on circumcision for salvation. That line always makes me giggle. I know it's very 10th grade-ish, but it's just odd. Okay, we'll move on. He said, they must be silenced. Like these teachers that are going around causing all this trouble saying, hey, you can't really be right with God unless you're circumcised. You can't really be right with God unless you keep this really long list of rules. Paul said, that's ridiculous. You got to shut them down. They're turning whole families away from the truth by their false teaching, and they do it only for money. All right, so Paul, all right, here's where we're at. Paul said, Titus, we started some churches on this island. I want you to go and get some people who have really high character, who are really well learned, and I want you to appoint them to positions of spiritual leadership in the church, and I want them to be able to refute these teachers who are coming in and trying to deceive people with false teaching, and they're really just doing it for money. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. You ready? Paul says this. He said, now, about these people on the island of Crete, where you're at, and you're supposed to be appointing spiritual leaders. He said, even one of their own men, a prophet from Crete, has said about them, the people of Crete, read this with me please, are all liars, cruel animals, and lazy gluttons. And then he said this, Paul says this, this is true. So, Titus, I want you, we started planting churches, I want you to go out and find spiritual leaders who have impeccable character, who are really smart, who are people who you could model your life after and make those people to be leaders in the church. Now, here's the truth, Titus. The people you have to work with, they're liars, they're cruel animals, and they're lazy gluttons. It's true. Like, I'm guessing if you could have read Titus's mind at that point, you would have seen a lot of those little bleep, bleep, bleeps, right? Like, Paul, are you kidding me? This is impossible. Like, I look around and all I see is people, and they even say it about themselves. We're a bunch of rotten to the core, messed up, screwed up people. We would be made to order for Jerry Springer, right? Like, we're a messed up group of people. And yet, Paul, you want me to find spiritual leaders who are living blameless lives and have high integrity and are managing their home well and who are doing well with their own finances and they're not drunk all the time. And these are the people I have to start with? It's impossible. Amazing. So I'm reading through this and I'm like, the mission is absolutely critical. If the church is going to exist, it's got to have spiritual leaders. It's got to have pastors. It's got to have people who can teach what God wants, right? The standard is super high, right? We just read through all the expectations of these people. There's a competing group of teachers who are living on this island who are trying to undo everything that Paul is doing. And this group that Titus and Paul are trying to raise up to be spiritual leaders are not impressive by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm realizing as I'm reading through this, I'm like, you know what? Sometimes the places where God calls us to serve and the people that God calls us to serve with, sometimes the things that God calls us to do require this: patience and kindness. Right? So we've been talking about love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. And let me just tell you something. Every single one of us in this room at some point was a mess, right? And you may still be a mess. I'm still a mess, right? If you dig hard enough into my life, like, you're going to find things you're like, oh, really? If I dig hard enough into your life, I'm going to be like, oh, really? This seems impossible. And yet, one of the characteristics of the church is to be patient and kind with one another, especially as we're in the process of learning how to be more like Jesus, like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, patience and kindness with one another. Now, this is Mark Servideo. And Mark first came to our church. We were in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. We were a pastor there. Mark came to our church. He had been unchurched, hadn't gone to church. His family didn't go to church. And he started playing the drums at our church. And I'll tell you, not everyone was a fan of Mark being on the stage. Or because there were a lot of people at our church at that point who said, he doesn't go to church. He's not a Christian. He shouldn't be playing on the stage. And our argument was, absolutely he should be playing on the stage. Let me just give you a couple reasons. Number one, he's a good drummer, right? I mean, like if you're a great Christian but you can't play the drums, then you shouldn't be on the stage. Can I get a witness, right? Yeah, come on now. But the other thing we talked a lot about was like, hey, if Mark is here playing the drums, he's surrounded by people who are trying to be more like Jesus, who are growing in our faith, and we're singing songs that are instructive, right? And so we just became friends with Mark, and we stuck with it. Some people didn't like it, but we stuck with it anyways. He went to some camps with us and played with our band. We spent hours together with him. Mark actually was a special man in our lives. Our first daughter, her name was Lexington, and we had this song that we would sing about Lexington. We would say, Lexington, Nicole, Ole, daddy's little girly early. Right, okay. And then Lexington, Nicole, Ole, mommy's little girly early. And then one day, Mark came and made up his own verse. You know how it went? Lexington, Nicole, Ole, Marky's little girly early. So all of a sudden, like, Mark is now a part of our family. And then Mark made this decision that one day he's like, you know what? I think I'm in. I'm seeing the people around me who are becoming more and more like Jesus. I'm feeling this love, patience, kindness, goodness thing, this stuff around here, and I want to be a part of it. And so one day Mark said, you know what? I'm in. I'm going to believe in Jesus, and I'm going to start beginning to follow his teachings. That was amazing. And then Mark got married. He has 2 small kids, and then Mark died. Mark had cancer. And at 30 years old, Mark died. And so we went back to Mark's funeral. And it was at a church that was packed with hundreds of people. And the majority of that funeral was spent singing songs of worship. Songs that Mark loved and sang and played. And it all started when a small handful of people were patient and kind. See, sometimes the church has this reputation of being, if you're not like us, you can't be one of us. If you don't believe like us, you can't be one of us. If you don't think like us, you can't be one of us. If you don't vote like us, you can't be one of us. If you don't look like us, you can't be one of us. And I just tell you the truth, around here, it doesn't work like that. Can I get a witness? Right? See, around here, what we realize is that we're all on a different journey, and some of us are still kind of cretin in our behaviors. You know what I mean by that? We're cruel animals, lazy gluttons, whatever else you want to fill in there. Some of us are still a long way, and some of us are farther along than others. But what we realize is that in the church, the way we're supposed to function towards one another is with patience and kindness. So around here, we like to say that our job, our mission, is to qualify the unqualified. That's what Titus had to do. He had to go in. Paul said, look, we're starting churches. We need spiritual leaders, and I need you to make them. Titus was like, are you kidding me? Look around. Paul's like, I know, but you know what? With patience and kindness, we'll be able to raise up men and women who can actually be models of godliness, and they can lead the church. Now, here's the truth. To patiently and kindly help one another, and others who are not yet in this building, discover God, connect with friends, and become a better person, that's just going to take some time. But here's the truth. We're all unqualified to begin with, aren't we? Think about this. You were unqualified the first time you tried to ride a bike, weren't you? But somebody took time and patiently and kindly helped you, and now you can ride a bike. Or at least you used to be able to, right? Okay. And then the first time you ever tried to drive a car, you remember that? Hey, how about this? First time you tried to drive a stick. Huh? Like, that was brutal, wasn't it? Like, your dad's screaming at you like, hey, just easy on the clutch, right? You were unqualified to drive a car until someone patiently and kindly took the time to qualify you. And then you were unqualified to buy a car until someone patiently and kindly taught you what it would take to buy a car. And now most of us are able to go out and figure out, we get on Blue Book or we do a little internet research, we figured out how to buy a car without our dad or mom holding our hand, right? Because someone took the time to patiently and kindly qualify us. And the truth is, whenever you start a new job or whenever you go into a new position or even when you get into a new relationship or whatever it is, you are where you are because someone along the way patiently and kindly helped you become qualified. And now you have the necessary skills, you have the necessary knowledge, and you have the credentials to get the job done. And what someone did for you with your bike and with your car and with your job, God wants to do in your life. And you know how he does that? He uses his church. I mean, here's the truth. I love Starbucks coffee, and I'm sure if Jesus were around, he would too, right? Because he seems like that kind of guy. But I've never had Starbucks with Jesus. But I have had Starbucks with some of you guys. And I have had Starbucks with some other more mature believers who've invested into my life. And I'm becoming better because the church is willing and understands that if I'm going to qualify Paul, who is now unqualified, it's going to take patience and kindness. And you're in the same position. And let me just tell you something. When you look around our church, listen, if you're a believer, if you believe in Jesus and he's changing your life, let me just tell you something. I don't ever want us to be impatient with people or unkind to people. No matter what they look like, no matter who they walk through the door with, no matter what they smell like, no matter what they believe. Because God is patient with you and kind with you and with me, and now he expects us in turn to invest in people who are coming in through our doors. See, I believe that this is not just the job of the pastor, right? It's the job of everyone who calls himself a Christian. Because here's the truth, gang. Like, I have 6 daughters and a wife, and I now have 3 dogs, by the way, because I got 2 last night, right? Let me just tell you this. This is completely unrelated to anything, but it's worth telling. So my house consists of 6 girls, my bride, that's 7 girls. We have a dog who's a female. We have 4 guinea pigs, all female. We have a bearded dragon, which is a female. We have all fish. I'm pretty sure they're all female because there's no babies, right? So we've been looking for a while to get a replacement or another dog for our dog to play with. And last night, we got this great deal. We had a friend who just had a baby, and she's like, I have these 2 dogs. They're little tiny dogs, and I need to get rid of them. We're like, great, because our dog's a Mastiff. We don't need another big dog. We need a small dog. So we went and to pick them up, and it's 2 boys. So I now have 2 boys in the house with me. Isn't that a good deal? Oh. Crazy. Anyways, that has nothing to do with anything. So, I actually forget where I was. I'm talking to you. Oh, it's not my job. Listen, here's what I was saying. It's not my job. I can't do this for everybody. I have 6 kids and now 3 dogs and a wife and guinea pigs. And then I have a handful of people that I personally am investing in. I can't do it. And here's the other thing. Not everybody likes me. Right? There are some people who will like you more than they like me. How about that? There's some Fitz, my friend Fitz, who sits up here and does this and this. He sings this song, right? He sings this song. He says, I need you, you need me. He said, I have things in my life that you need, and you have things in your life that I need. We need one another. And there may be someone sitting in here today who I couldn't help you one tiny bit, but someone 2 rows ahead of you could absolutely give you everything you need to help qualify the unqualified. So let me just say this. This is a long time to get to this point. But if you're a believer, you really do have a responsibility to patiently and kindly come along people and love them well. People who may not know or believe or act or think or look like you do. Let me just tell you this. I think the church, particularly this church, is a place where people who don't know how to stay married learn the skills and grow the capacity to stay married for the rest of their lives. Approximately 50% of marriages will end in divorce. And yet God is on record as saying, I hate this. It breaks my heart because I know what it's going to do to you. It's going to scar you. It's going to hurt you. It's going to hurt your kids. Isn't there a way we can figure this out? And in this church, I think we can. I think we can help one another. I think patiently and kindly we invest in one another and figure out how to make this work so that we're the other 50%, right? I think in this church, we help one another in the area of finances. I mean, most people think that debt is a pet. But in here, let's learn how to handle money God's way so we can save big, so we can give big, so we can prepare for the future, so we can do things. I'm just reading the other day and found multiple points of research said 1 in 4 people literally have no emergency savings. That means that if your refrigerator goes out, which by the way it's going to sometime, you're going to have to go in debt. God says there's a better way, right? And listen to this, more research says that we're more worried about paying for our next vacation than about saving for retirement. I would say, they have research that says that more people spend energy thinking about and planning vacation than they do about their retirement. Hey, guess what? You're going to get old someday, right? What then? See, as we read through the scriptures, it teaches us how to handle and how to plan well for the future. And we need one another in the church so that we can save our marriages, so that we can recreate our finances, so that we can, let's talk about, so we can help one another escape addictions, so that we can help one another make big, bold, brave decisions. Hey, listen, anytime you're getting ready to start something new, is anybody just experiencing a little bit of fear, right? But in the community of the church around here, we patiently and kindly help one another to move towards the thing that God has called us to be and do. We qualify with patience and kindness, we qualify one another to live that God-empowered life, but it's going to take patience and kindness with one another. Now, whenever I talk about this stuff, I think like, is there ever a time, so now I just want to teach a little bit, okay? Is there ever a time when we need to be done being patient and kind? Like, is there ever a time where we're like, my patience has now run out. I can't be kind with this any longer. And I can think of 3. Let me give them to you. I think our patience is done when our patience and kindness is enabling. Let me show you why I say that. In Proverbs 19:19, it says this: hot-tempered people must pay the penalty. If you rescue them once, you'll have to do it again. Now, you could replace hot-tempered with any dysfunctional behavior, right? Let me give you an example. Let's say someone can't handle their finances, all right? And so what happens is they go out and they buy a brand new set of shoes and a brand new iPhone, and they eat at the Pump House, right? Multiple nights a week, right? And then they come and say, I can't pay my electric bill. Now listen, sometimes the right thing to do is say, hey, you know what? Let me help you. Let's help you. We'll pay it, all right? And then let's sit down and put a plan together so you don't do this again. But what happens if next month they come back and say, man, the Pump House was amazing, and I got these new kicks, but I can't pay my electric bill. At some point, if you patiently and kindly continue to pay the bill, you don't love them. You're enabling their dysfunctional behavior. And so Proverbs 19:19 says, if you continue to reap what they've sown, to pick what they've planted, they're never going to learn their lesson. At some point, dysfunctionality has to learn its lesson through consequences, because all that we do can never really help someone learn if they refuse to assume some level of responsibility, right? Now listen, when your patience and kindness is enabling, honestly, the best thing you can do is gently and lovingly say, I can't do this anymore. I really can't. Now, we could go on, and we could talk a lot about that. There's all kinds of caveats to that. But as a general principle, when your patience and kindness is enabling, it's not helpful anymore. A second time, when your patience and kindness is not helpful, is when it's wasted. So let me just run through 3 verses quick in Proverbs. Proverbs 17:16 says, it's senseless to pay to educate a fool, since he has no heart for learning. I could pay for you to take the best class. I could pay for you to get the best coaching, the best instruction. But if you sit there on your phone the whole time the person is talking, it's not going to work, is it? I could invest the very best in you, or you could, let's just say, you could invest the very best in me, but if while the person is coaching, I'm sending text messages to my girlfriend, not going to work. Proverbs says it's senseless to do that. Now look at this. Proverbs 18:2. Fools have no interest in understanding. They only want to air their own opinions. Have you ever been, listen, if you're a parent, you've been in this situation. You're trying to tell your kids something that's right and good and wise and it will help them, and you can tell they can't wait till you're done so they can tell you why they're doing stupid, right? You been in that? So kids do that, but the crazy thing is some adults do that too. And so Proverbs says, listen, in that case, listen, there's no sense continuing trying to coach, continuing trying to invest, continuing patiently, kindly showing up every day and saying, hey, let's sit down for our coaching lesson, because they don't want to hear what you have to say. They want to say what they need to say, right? Finally, Proverbs 23:9. Don't waste your breath on fools, for they'll despise the wisest advice. Listen, every once in a while I think it's good to say this. If no one is ever trying to offer you counsel or input or helpful critique, it might be because you're a fool. But if you realize that there's people investing in and speaking into your life, and I'm not talking like unhealthy criticism, and every time that you turn a corner, they're there to point a finger and criticize, not that at all, but someone who lovingly, patiently, kindly offers helpful insight into your life, that's a big deal. The Proverbs says, listen, if your patience and kindness is being wasted and it's not being received, you can lovingly step away from that, okay? Third time, where patience and kindness are probably not most appropriate, is when someone is being divisive. St. Paul said to Titus, he said, listen, you're building this church, you're helping and to raise up pastors and spiritual leaders, and you got a crazy mess to work with, but patiently and kindly instruct them and teach them. And he said, here's what I want you to do, Titus. He said, this is in his letter to Titus. He said, don't get involved in foolish discussions about spiritual pedigrees or in quarrels and fights about obedience to Jewish laws. These things are useless and a waste of time. Listen, Not all church people, but a lot of times church people have a tendency to want to have conversations and waste energy arguing over things that, quite frankly, aren't all that important. And churches split sometimes over the stupidest nonsense, right? And Paul essentially said, don't do that. Like, don't have those conversations. Like, should we read just King James or can we read the New Living Translation too? Never going to have that conversation here. Because it doesn't matter, right? If you like King James, read King James. If you like New Living Translation, read New Living Translation. If you think it should only be King James, you're not going to like our church, right? Because we're not going to argue about those things here, around here. But then Paul says this. He says, if people are causing divisions among you, give a first and second warning. After that, have nothing to do with them, right? Let's not fight. We're not going to fight. We're not going to keep gossiping and tearing one another apart. Not around here. And Paul says, listen, there's a time where there is no time for patience and kindness. And that is one of these times, especially in the church. We're not going to tear one another apart. That's what Paul says. It's a good word. But the truth is, there's a lot of people, and even right here in this room, that genuinely want to get better, that genuinely want to grow spiritually, that genuinely want to be more like Jesus. They want to learn how to move from here to there. So how do we do this? How do we move from here to there? Let me give you 3 quick ways, okay? This is what Paul said to Titus. He said, look, you've got this crazy group of people that you got to start with. You got to qualify the unqualified. You got to help these people who are lazy, they're cruel animals, they're evil, all these pejorative terms, right? He said you got to help them become someone who some other people could look at and say, that's what a godly life looks like. First of all, that gives me a lot of hope. You know, I think about, I've told you my story along the way, but before Jesus, I was a high school dropout. I had attempted suicide and failed, which was essentially the story of my life because I kept failing at everything I put my hand to. And essentially, I had no clue about what I was going to do in life. And just staggering along, staggering through life, right? And then I met Jesus. And everything changed for me, right? Married for 20 years to one amazing lady. 6 amazing girls. I'm clear on what I'm supposed to do for the rest of my life. Absolutely clear. And Jesus made the difference. But the issue here was that there were some people who took the time to invest in this young guy who didn't have a clue, who barely wanted to live, who was struggling with addictions. And there were some people who cared enough to be patient and kind. And so Paul said, Titus, when you're working with these people, there's 3 things you got to do. Here they are, number 1. And this, quite frankly, is what we as a church have to do for one another. Number 1, we must live the way. So it's interesting that Paul, as he's writing to Timothy, he keeps saying this word, teach, 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 teach. You got to teach, you got to teach. So the letter that he wrote to Titus is literally the front of one page. It's literally the front of one page and the back of the same page. So it's not a big letter, okay? It's like that. Not a big letter at all. But in that short little letter, he used the word teach or some derivative of it 14 times. You got to teach them. You got to teach them. You got to teach them. Right? Now, let me go back just a minute. I'm talking about live the way. I got ahead of myself because I like to talk about teaching. Give me a minute, all right? Essentially, Paul says, you got to live the way. This is what he said. He said, look, you yourself must be an example to these people that you're trying to help develop. You must be an example to them by doing good works of every kind. Let everything you do reflect the integrity and the seriousness of your teaching. In other words, they're going to say, well, Titus, what's it look like to stay married to one woman for a really long time? He's like, well, just check out my marriage. Titus, what's it look like to stop lusting and being addicted to pornography? And you can say, well, just look at me. Titus, what's it look like to start managing your money well? Well, just look at me. Look what Jesus is doing in my life. Not perfect yet, but definitely learning. Titus, what does it look like to, and essentially Paul is saying, everything you want these people to become, you have to become as well. And so let me say to every believer in this room, these things right here that we're talking about, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, all that stuff, we have to do this if we want people walking inside of the church to do that as well. We have to show them what it looks like because in our culture, these things are becoming increasingly rare. So we have to do it first. Live the way. And then the second thing Paul said was you have to teach the way. And that's what I just talked to you about, all right? Because I love this idea of teaching, all right? 14 times in this tiny little letter, he's like, Paul, Titus, you got to teach them. You got to teach them. You got to teach them. You got to show them and introduce new concepts. You got to explain how to live life in our culture. You got to do this. You got to do this. You got to do this. Now, one of the changes that I want to talk to you about on Wednesday, I'm just going to talk to you about it right now because I can't wait, is at our church, for the longest time, we've realized like we just want to create an environment, honestly, where anyone can come in here and be a part. Like, we know we can't force anyone to move into a relationship with God. We can't do that. But what we can do is set up a first date. And so we work really, really hard to create an environment where it's not judgmental, that's filled with love, and where there's goodness, and where, we work so hard to create that kind of environment. But at some point, people who are walking in are saying, okay, I'm getting it, but I want the next level. I want more teaching. I want something else. And so what we're doing is in September, we're going to launch something called 180 University. And basically what's going to happen in 180 University is we're going to come into this room on Wednesday night. How many of you grew up in church and that was when you went like 10 times in a week, right? Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. And then your preacher always had like a 2-week revival, so you went for like 14 days in a row. Insane. All right, we're not going to do that, okay? And this is not, I remember where they would say like, okay, we're going to have Wednesday night prayer meeting, and you would go to Wednesday night prayer meeting, and they prayed for like 5 minutes. So we're not doing that either. This literally is an environment, you're going to walk in here, there's going to be tables set up. There's not going to be any music. There's not going to be any lights. There's not going to be any slides. We're basically going to come in. We're going to have notes. We're going to have a Bible and a pen, and we're going to dig deep. We're going to dig deep. We're going to start talking about things like, at some point, we've got to have these conversations about how to have good attitudes and how to fix marriage and how to do all this stuff. But at some point as Christians, we believe in things like the Trinity. So we're going to start digging into that. We're going to look at the doctrine of salvation. We're going to look at how Jesus saves us. We're going to look at end times. We're going to look at the Bible. We're going to really get into deep kind of stuff on Wednesday night at 180 University. It's literally going to be like a university classroom environment. We're going to teach. There'll be dialogue back and forth, but it's really going to be a teaching environment because we believe the Bible is filled with so much good stuff. There's no way to get it all in this kind of environment. And I'll never, this environment on Sunday morning is more like a locker room experience, right? We're not going to get deep and dig deep into plays. Sunday morning is more like, hey, here's an idea. Go live it on Monday. Yay. Wednesday night, we're going to start getting into digging deep into the things God wants us to do. It'll start in September, okay? So teaching. That's the second thing Paul said. We got to live the way. We got to teach the way. And then he said this. We have to encourage. We have to encourage the way. This is the way God wants us to live. These are the ways God wants us to treat our husbands or our wives. This is the way God wants us to handle it when we're under stress. This is the way, right? And so Paul said this. He's like, look, Titus, I want you to encourage the young men to live wisely. And you yourself must be an example to them by doing good works of every kind. Encourage it. Let me just tell you, in our culture, there's so many voices calling people to live in ways that aren't godlike. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness. Paul says, I want you to teach people how to do it, and then when you see them do it, encourage the mess out of them. Literally, dude, that was great. I saw how you handled that. I saw how you navigated that stress. I saw how you said yes and did the right thing. I saw how you said no and you stopped doing whatever it was, and you celebrate and you encourage. Paul said, this is what we're going to do, is we're patiently and kindly qualifying the unqualified. Then he said this, Titus 2:15. You must teach these things and encourage the believers to do them. Let me just tell you something. In this room, there are people who don't believe in Jesus. Thank you for being here. I know it's always a big risk to come into a church. You don't know what we're going to do to you. You don't know what we're going to ask you to do. You don't know. It's weird. I know that. I believe that. I assume that someone like you is here every single week. But in this room, there are people who believe in Jesus. And we're at all kinds of different, some people love really well. Some people are unbelievably patient. Others are really, really kind. Others of us are still really working on it. And so you know what we have to do is when you see a believer who's patient, you got to say, man, that was amazing. I saw how you handled it right there. Or good game. However you do that, right? encouraging one another as we see one another living out these characteristics. Listen, there are a lot of churches where gossip is normal. At our church, we like to say this: if you gossip, please stop. If you can't stop, please leave, because we don't want that mess around here. Instead, what should be normal is encouraging one another, right? Okay. I like when I say that and no one leaves. That makes me happy. Okay. So let me just do this. I started thinking, like, what would happen if just in this room, we all just committed to being patient with one another and kind towards one another? Like, what would happen if every single one of us in this room said, look, I'm going to commit to qualifying the unqualified. I'm going to help somebody get something that I've got that they don't have yet. I'm going to help them get that. Here's what Paul said to Titus. He said, look, out of all these unqualified, these crazy people that you're supposed to make spiritual leaders, if you'll do these things, if you'll live the way, if you'll teach the way, if you'll encourage the way, you will find that there's people who are qualified to be pastors who grow up out of this group. You will find that there's older ladies who are able to patiently and kindly mentor younger ladies. You will find that lazy people can become great employees and maybe even employers. You will find that liars become men and women of integrity. You will find that men who have no self-control can discover self-control and even be respectable. As people begin to move towards Jesus and he begins to move into them and they begin to trust him and he begins to transform their lives, as we model it for them, as we teach them how, as we encourage every single win, you'll be blown away what God can do in the lives of the people sitting around you. As I read that letter, I thought to myself, I wonder who's sitting in this room right now, that God is calling to be a pastor. Someone in this room, it very likely could be, God has been knocking on your door and saying, maybe you should explore this. And the first thought is like, are you kidding me? I'm a cruel animal. I'm a lazy glutton, right? But there's so much hope for everyone when we're in an environment like around here that's filled with love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. I wonder in this room if there's someone that has a hard time telling the truth. Like you're always lying and you hate that about yourself. Let me just tell you something. God can change that and make you a man of integrity. And the job of the church is to come alongside and show you what it looks like and teach you how to do that and encourage you as you tell the truth. Who's sitting in this room that God wants to qualify to teach or to lead or to create or to mentor or to start something or to stop something? I believe that every single one of us in this room have been called by God and have been given something exceptional and unique to do. And it's not going to happen if you stay alone by yourself. God has called us to do life together as the church and community and experience things like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And our job as believers, wherever we are in our journey, is to model this, to live the way, and then teach the way and encourage it in others when we see that happening. Gang, if we do that kind of stuff around here, it's amazing what can happen. I love Jake's story. Jake, I love you, even though you're younger than me, right? I love you. I love what God is doing in Jake's life, and I'm seeing it in other lives as well. I can't wait to see what God does in his life, where he takes him, what he makes out of Jake. Jake's already made some really cool moves, right? And there are other people in this room. Watching Josh get up here, right? Going to talk more and more. Josh is a great talker, isn't he? He's good. I love watching God use Josh and just others of you that God is beginning to create these kind of characteristics in. And what I know is that all of us now have a responsibility to keep creating this by living, teaching, encouraging. And so what I want to do today is I'm going to pray. And our band is going to come up and we're going to start a song. We're going to sing a song that starts off like this. We look to the Son because Jesus is the one who ultimately begins this transformation on the inside. Jesus is the one who ultimately begins changing us as we believe in him and saying, I'm not that person. I'm not loving. I'm not kind. I'm not patient. Please forgive me and come inside of me and begin to change me. Jesus begins the process. So we look to him. We're going to sing this song together, and then after we're done, our host team is going to come up. They're going to wrap things up for us this morning. But as they're coming, as the band is coming, I just want to pray. Father, this morning we look to Jesus because ultimately you're the one that changes us. Before Jesus and after Jesus. Before Jesus, God, we're addicted, we're angry, we struggle, we search, and then we find Jesus and things begin to happen. We begin to experience things that we never experienced before, like a propensity to love and this ability to be patient. And those things are enhanced as we find ourselves a part of a church that does things like model the way and encourage and teach. I pray, God, that Church 180 will be a place just like that. I pray that the homes and people who have called Church 180 their church would be filled with love and joy and peace and patience and kindness. Thank you for enabling us to live like this. And thank you for a church that comes around us and encourages us in this process. We look to you, Jesus. You're the one that gets it all started. And this morning we ask that you would empower us as we trust in you to live bigger, better lives that are definitely filled with patience and kindness. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Paul. That was amazing. You filthy animal, you. Join us for this last song we sing. Oh, we look to the sun, set our eyes on the sea.